You really thought nobody would find out? That you could hide behind your silence, behind your excuses, behind that carefully painted smile? Heh, funny, isn't it? Because the truth has a way of creeping in, scratching at the walls, whispering in the dark, until one day boom, it's standing right in front of you, laughing. You see, people think they can fool the world. Pretend. Delay. Escape. But the real joke, you can't fool yourself. And tonight, we're not laughing with the joke anymore. We're exposing it. So go ahead, sit comfortably if you can, because this isn't just a speech, it's a wake-up call. And trust me, the punchline, you won't see it coming. Truth always surfaces. People think truth is fragile, something that can be hidden, buried, locked away where no one will ever reach it. They treat it like a small, powerless thing, easy to silence, easy to ignore. But that's the illusion. Truth is not weak. It doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. It waits. Quietly. Patiently. At first, it feels like control. You tell yourself that nothing has happened, that everything is fine, that no one needs to know. You build layers of excuses, distractions, half-stories stacked carefully to protect the version of reality you want others to see. And for a while, it works. People believe what they're shown. They don't question too deeply. Life moves on, and it almost feels like you've succeeded. But truth doesn't argue. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention right away. Instead, it lingers beneath the surface, shaping everything in subtle ways. A hesitation in your voice, a flicker in your expression, a moment where your story doesn't quite match up. These small cracks begin to form, almost invisible at first, but they grow over time. The more you try to hide something, the more energy it takes to maintain the illusion. Every lie needs another lie to support it. Every cover requires another layer. It becomes exhausting, even if you don't admit it. You start to feel it, the weight of something unresolved, something unfinished. And that weight doesn't fade. It builds. Truth has a strange way of finding paths you never expected. Sometimes it comes through other people's questions you weren't ready for, observations you didn't think anyone noticed. Sometimes it comes through circumstances, situations that force reality into the open. And sometimes it comes from within when your own thoughts refuse to stay quiet any longer. There's a moment always when the illusion begins to collapse. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. The confidence you once had in your version of events starts to weaken. Doubt creeps in. You begin to realize that what you've been holding together isn't as solid as you believed. And when truth finally surfaces, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for the perfect time. It simply appears clear, undeniable, impossible to push back down. Everything that was hidden becomes visible. Everything that was avoided becomes unavoidable. What makes truth powerful is not just that it comes out, but that it changes everything around it. Once it's there, you can't unsee it. You can't return to the version of reality that existed before. The perspective shifts. The understanding deepens. And whether you're ready or not, you have to face it. People often fear this moment, not because truth itself is dangerous, but because of what it reveals. It strips away the comfort of denial. It removes the protection of ignorance. It shows things exactly as they are, without distortion, without decoration. And that's why truth always surfaces not because it's forced, but because it's constant. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. It waits whether you accept it or not. And eventually, in one way or another, it becomes impossible to ignore. You can't outrun yourself. You can change places. You can change people. You can change your routine, your habits, even your identity on the surface. New environment, new faces, new distractions, that all feels like distance. Like you've put space between who you were and who you are now. But distance is deceptive. Because no matter how far you go, there's one thing that moves at exactly the same speed as you do, yourself. At first, it feels like progress. You convince yourself that leaving something behind means escaping it. That by stepping into something new, you've erased what came before. And for a moment, it works. The noise fades. The reminders disappear. You breathe easier, thinking you've finally gotten away from whatever was chasing you. But it's never really behind you. It's inside you in your thoughts, your reactions, your instincts. It shows up in the quiet moments when there's nothing left to distract you. In the way you respond to pressure. In the patterns you repeat without even realizing it. You may not see it right away, but it's there, waiting for the right moment to remind you. Running becomes a habit. Whenever something feels uncomfortable, you move. Whenever something challenges you, you shift direction. It feels like control, like you're always one step ahead. But over time, that constant movement starts to reveal something else, a cycle. The same problems, the same feelings, the same outcomes, just in different places and different forms. That's when it becomes harder to ignore, because it stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like a reflection. You begin to notice that. No matter where you go, certain things follow. Not because they're chasing you, but because they're part of you. Unresolved thoughts, unfaced fears, choices you never fully dealt with. They don't disappear just because you changed your surroundings. They adapt. They wait. They resurface when you least expect them. And the more you try to outrun them, the more power you give them. Because running means you never confront them. You never understand them. You never take control of them. Instead, they stay just out of reach, close enough to influence you, but distant enough to avoid direct attention. It's exhausting, even if you don't admit it. Always moving, always adjusting, always trying to stay ahead of something you can't quite define. There's a constant tension in Ita feeling that no matter how fast you go, it's not fast enough. Because it isn't about speed, it's about direction. You can't outrun yourself because there's no finish line where you suddenly become someone else. There's no place where everything you've avoided simply disappears. Wherever you arrive, you bring your entire history with you, every decision, every habit, every unresolved piece. And eventually, movement stops being escape and starts being repetition. The same thoughts reappear. The same situations unfold. The same patterns play out again and again until it becomes impossible to pretend it's random. That's when the realization begins to settle in that the problem was never the place, or the people, or the timing. It was always closer than that. Closer than distance can fix. Closer than change can erase. Because no matter how far you run, no matter how fast you move, no matter how many times you start over, there's one thing you can never leave behind. Yourself. Masks eventually crack. At first, the mask feels like protection. A carefully crafted version of yourself shaped to fit expectations, to avoid judgment, to maintain control over how others see you. It's polished, intentional, and convincing. You choose what to reveal and what to hide, building a version of reality that feels safer than the truth beneath it. People accept what they see. They respond to the image you present, not the reality you conceal. And that acceptance becomes addictive. It reinforces the idea that the mask is working, that it's necessary, that without it, everything might fall apart. So you keep it in place, adjusting it when needed, refining it over time. But wearing a mask is not effortless. It requires constant awareness of your words, your actions, your reactions. You measure everything, making sure nothing slips through. Every expression is controlled, every response calculated. It's not just about hiding something, it's about maintaining an illusion consistently, without interruption. That kind of control comes with pressure. The longer the mask stays on, the heavier it becomes. Not physically, but mentally. You begin to feel the strain of holding it together, of keeping every detail aligned. Small moments start to feel risky. A pause that lasts too long. A reaction that doesn't match the image. A question that cuts a little too close. These moments are subtle, but they matter, because they create cracks. At first, those cracks are easy to ignore. You tell yourself they're insignificant, that no one noticed, that everything is still intact, and maybe it is for now. But cracks don't disappear. They spread. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, they weaken. The structure you've built. Maintaining the mask becomes harder. The effort increases. What once felt natural now feels forced. You start to slip in small ways, contradictions, inconsistencies, things that don't quite align. And while others may not immediately see the full picture, they begin to sense that something isn't right. The illusion starts to lose its strength, because a mask is only convincing as long as it's flawless. The moment imperfections appear, the foundation begins to shift. Doubt enters the space where certainty once existed. Questions form, even if they're unspoken. And once doubt exists, it doesn't go away easily. What makes masks fragile is not their design, but their dependence on perfection. They cannot adapt to pressure the way authenticity can. They cannot adjust to unexpected situations without risk. They rely on consistency in a world that is constantly changing. And eventually, something gives. It might be a moment of stress where the control slips just enough to reveal what's underneath. It might be a situation that demands honesty, where the mask no longer fits. Or it might be the simple exhaustion of holding it in place for too long. When the crack becomes visible, it changes everything. Because once someone sees beyond the mask, even for a second, they can't completely unsee it. The illusion is no longer complete. The image is no longer seamless. And from that point on, every detail is questioned, every inconsistency examined more closely. The mask doesn't shatter instantly. It breaks in pieces. Each crack widening, each flaw becoming more apparent, until the effort required to maintain it outweighs the ability to sustain it. And when that happens, the version of reality you constructed begins to collapse under its own weight. Not because it was exposed all at once, but because it was never as unbreakable as it seemed. Consequences don't forget. At first, consequences feel distant, like something that belongs to the future, not the present. You make a decision, take an action, say something in the moment, and then you move on. Time passes, distractions take over, and it becomes easy to believe that what happened is already behind you. Out of sight, out of mind. That's the illusion. Because consequences don't operate on your sense of timing. They don't disappear just because you stop thinking about them. They don't lose track of what happened or decide that enough time has passed. They remain connected to the action. That created them even when everything else seems to move forward. At first, nothing happens. No immediate reaction, no visible impact. That silence can feel like relief, like you got away with it, like the outcome you feared simply didn't exist. And that belief starts to settle in, reinforcing the idea that maybe consequences aren't as real as they seemed. But silence isn't absence. It's delay. Consequences have a way of unfolding gradually. They build beneath the surface, shaping situations, influencing outcomes, setting things in motion without announcing themselves. What seems like a separate event later on often traces back to something earlier, something that felt insignificant at the time. That connection isn't always obvious, which makes it easier to ignore. You start to separate actions from outcomes, convincing yourself that one has nothing to do with the other, that what's happening now is unrelated to what happened before. But consequences don't lose that connection. They carry it forward, quietly linking cause and effect even when you don't see it. And over time, those links become harder to deny. Patterns emerge. Situations repeat. Outcomes begin to feel familiar, even when the circumstances are different. That's when the realization starts to form that something is following a path, a sequence that isn't random. Because it isn't. Every choice creates direction. Every action sets something into motion. And those motions don't just stop on their own. They continue interacting with other decisions, other circumstances, creating results that may not appear immediately, but are never disconnected from their origin. Ignoring consequences doesn't erase them, it postpones them. And postponement has a cost. The longer something is left unaddressed, the more complex it becomes. What could have been simple grows into something more difficult to manage, more difficult to understand, more difficult to control. It expands, affecting more than just the original situation. That's where the weight begins to show. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. A shift in outcomes, a change in how things unfold. A sense that something is catching up, even if you can't fully explain how or why. It's not sudden, but it's persistent. Consequences don't rush. They arrive when they arrive. And when they do, they don't need reminders. They don't need explanations. They don't need you to acknowledge them beforehand. They simply present the result of what was set in motion, whether you're prepared for it or not. What makes consequences unavoidable is their consistency. They follow the same principle every time actions lead to outcomes. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but inevitably. That connection doesn't weaken over time. It doesn't fade with distance. It remains intact, regardless of how much you try to separate yourself from it. And when the moment comes where everything aligns, the action, the time, the situation, the result becomes clear. Not because it suddenly appeared, but because it was always there, moving forward, waiting for the point where it could no longer be overlooked. Accountability is inevitable. At first, accountability feels like something external. A system, a person, a set of rules waiting to catch mistakes and assign responsibility. It seems avoidable as long as no one sees, no one questions, no one challenges. You begin to believe that accountability only exists when someone else enforces it. So, you focus on avoiding detection. You measure your actions not by their impact, but by whether they can be traced back to you. You calculate risk, not truth. And when nothing happens, when no one calls it out, no consequences appear immediately, it reinforces the belief that you're in control of the outcome. But accountability doesn't depend on observation. It doesn't require an audience. It exists whether it's acknowledged or not because it's tied directly to action. Every choice carries ownership, whether you accept it or try to distance yourself from it. And that ownership doesn't disappear just because you shift the narrative or redirect attention. At first, distancing feels effective. You explain things in a way that softens responsibility. You adjust details, omit parts, reshape the story until it feels less connected to you. And for a while, it works not necessarily because the truth has changed, but because it hasn't been fully confronted. But avoiding accountability isn't the same as removing it. It builds quietly. Each moment where responsibility is ignored adds to something unseen but present. A growing gap between reality and the version you present. That gap requires maintenance, just like any other illusion. It needs consistency, reinforcement, and constant adjustment to remain intact. And that maintenance becomes a burden. Because accountability has a way of returning, not as a sudden force, but as a gradual pressure. It appears in different forms: questions that demand clearer answers, situations that expose inconsistencies, outcomes that point back to earlier decisions. Each one narrowing the space where avoidance can exist. You begin to notice that things aren't as separate as they seemed. That actions don't stay isolated. That responsibility doesn't vanish just because it was postponed. The more you try to shift it away, the more it reappears in another form. Not identical, but connected. A pattern begins to take shape, showing. That accountability isn't something that can be redirected indefinitely. It adjusts, it adapts, but it doesn't disappear. And over time, the distance you created starts to close. Not all at once, but steadily. The narratives you relied on become harder to maintain. The explanations require more effort. The confidence in avoiding responsibility weakens as more connections become visible. It's no longer just about what happened, it's about how everything aligns. Accountability doesn't need to be forced into place. It settles on its own, because at its core, it's not about punishment or control. It's about alignment between action and ownership, and that alignment is constant, whether it's accepted or resisted. The longer it's resisted, the more tension it creates, until that tension demands resolution. There's a point where avoidance stops being effective, where shifting responsibility becomes more difficult than facing it, where the effort required to maintain distance outweighs the effort required to accept ownership. And in that moment, accountability becomes clear not as something imposed, but as something that was always present, always connected, always moving alongside every decision that was made, not waiting to be discovered, but waiting to be recognized. The real exposure is internal. At first, exposure feels like something that happens outside. Being seen, being judged, being revealed in front of others. The fear is tied to perception, what people will think, how they will react, what they will say when something hidden comes into the light. It becomes a performance where the goal is to manage the image and control what is visible. So the focus stays external. You watch how others respond. You measure reactions. You adjust behavior to maintain a certain impression. It feels like the only thing that matters is what can be observed, what can be proven, what can be pointed at. If nothing is visibly exposed, then nothing has really happened. That's the illusion. Because the most significant exposure doesn't happen in front of an audience. It happens in silence. It happens in the moments when there is no distraction, no performance, no one else to convince. When the external noise fades and you are left alone with your own thoughts, your own awareness, your own understanding of what is real. That's where things begin to surface. Not dramatically, not all at once, but clearly. You start to recognize things you've been avoiding. Patterns in your behavior. Decisions you justified too quickly. Reactions that didn't come from nowhere, but from something deeper that you never fully addressed. These realizations don't need proof. They don't need validation. They exist because you experience them directly. And they're harder to ignore than anything external. Because you can influence what others see, but you can't completely silence what you know. At first, it's subtle. A thought that lingers longer than it should. A moment of reflection that feels uncomfortable. A sense that something doesn't align even if everything looks fine on the surface. You push it aside, distract yourself, move on to something else. But it comes back, not as a confrontation, but as persistence. The more you try to avoid it, the more noticeable it becomes. Not louder, not more aggressive, just clearer. It doesn't need intensity to have impact. It only needs consistency. A steady reminder that something beneath the surface hasn't been resolved. This kind of exposure doesn't rely on timing. It doesn't wait for the right situation. It doesn't depend on anyone else discovering anything. It exists continuously, shaping how you think, how you respond, how you see yourself. Even if everything externally remains intact, internally there's a shift, a growing awareness that something is present, something that hasn't been addressed, and that awareness changes things. It affects decisions. It influences reactions. It creates hesitation where there was once certainty. Because once something is recognized internally, even without full clarity, it becomes part of how you process everything else. You can't return to complete unawareness. You can only move forward with what you now know. That's what makes internal exposure so significant. It doesn't force immediate action. It doesn't demand visible change, but it alters the foundation. It introduces a level of clarity that wasn't there before, whether you choose to act on it or not. And over time, clarity deepens. Connections become more obvious. Patterns become more defined. What once felt vague becomes more structured, more difficult to dismiss as coincidence or overthinking. It takes shape, not because something new is being created, but because something that was already there is being seen more clearly. There's no audience for this, no reaction to manage, no narrative to adjust. Just awareness, steady and present, revealing things exactly as they are, without distortion, without distraction, without the need for anything external to confirm it.